Okay, this is the book of Isaiah, the 25th chapter, the 7th verse. And it says this: And he will destroy in this mountain, he is the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, through his Son, Yahushai, through this knowledge, through this truth. He will destroy in this mountain. Mountain is a metaphor for the government, this government of Esau, the Edomite government that we're in right now. He will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people and the veil that is spread over all nations. So what's an example of that? These fake constructs that were created many years ago to hide people from their true nationality. And a great example of that is this term, white people. As we've been telling you, there's no such thing as white people. There's no such thing as black people. Okay, now in this video, we're going to deal with the term white people and how it's being destroyed. That term, that is, by the truth finally coming out, where that term goes back to, the term white people. Okay, so what I did was this. I went to Google and I typed in Google, and I was surprised the information came up. And that is prophecy being fulfilled. Like it says here, he will destroy in this mountain the face of the covering cast over all people, and the veil that is spread over all nations. The covering cast and the veil are these fake constructs that were created to divide people. And a great example is that term, white people. So let's go into it. So this is from Google. What I did was I typed in the invention of white people, Bacon's rebellion, because Bacon's rebellion has something to do with that term white people. That's where it came from. It came from Bacon's rebellion. Okay, let's read about it. It says the invention of white people is often associated with Bacon's rebellion. Okay, Nathaniel Bacon was the name of where the term Bacon's rebellion comes from. It comes from Nathaniel Bacon. Okay, a colonial uprising in Virginia, the state of Virginia, in 1676, where the rebellion of poor white indentured servants alongside enslaved Africans against the ruling class led the elite to solidify racial distinctions, essentially creating a white identity to divide the poor and prevent future united rebellions by solidifying the concept of racial hierarchy. So it's the old divide and conquer. Because when you read about the Bacon's rebellion, what you had was so-called blacks coming together with poor so-called whites to fight against the wealthy, to fight against the elite aristocracy. Okay, so the elite aristocracy, which no doubt were Edomites, created that divide and conquer. All right, and they created it by putting that term white people, or creating that construct white people, on the poor indentured servants, the so-called whites that were indentured servants, which many of them had to be Jakes. They had to be of the lineage of Jake. They just happened to look like so-called white people. Okay, so that's where that term goes back to. But let's keep reading. It says, essentially creating a white identity to divide the poor and prevent future united rebellions by solidifying the concept of racial hierarchy, with enslaved Africans at the bottom just because of the way they look, the color of their skin. They were at the bottom. And that, again, that goes back to the scriptures. That goes back to the creases, right? With enslaved Africans, which they were not Africans, they were Israelites, okay, at the bottom, and poor whites given a slightly elevated status. See, even though a lot of them were of the lineage of Jake, the lineage of Israelites, even though they happened to look like so-called white people, but they got the privilege just because of the way they looked. And they were slapped with a fake identity, a fake construct called white people. Okay? So now the truth is coming out. All right? It says, effectively solidifying the concept of race as a social construct to maintain power dynamics, right? Okay, now let's keep reading. Key points about Bacon's rebellion and the invention of white people. Unified rebellion. During the rebellion, both poor, so-called white, indentured servants, and enslaved, so-called Africans joined forces against the wealthy planters and colonial government, causing fear among the elite. You see that? And that's what the elite did. They created that old divide and conquer. Okay? Read on. It says, response to rebellion. To prevent future unified uprisings. Listen to this. This is very important. To prevent future unified uprisings, the ruling class began to create legal distinctions between white and black people. Okay, and there's no such thing as so-called black people or black people. There's no such thing as white people. These are fake constructs that were created. And that's, again, that is Isaiah 25:7. He shall in this mountain destroy the covering cast over all people, the veil that is spread over all nations. This is a perfect example of that. We're now getting down to the truth of who people really are. Everybody's going back to their true biblical nationality. That's what's happening, man. Everyone is going back to their true biblical nationality. Who the Edomites are, who the Israelites are, who the Hamites are, who the Moabites are, who the Ammonites are. Okay? This is the time we're living in, man. All right? Response to rebellion. To prevent future unified uprisings, the ruling class began to create legal distinctions between white and black people, solidifying the concept of race and granting some privileges to poor whites while firmly establishing slavery for so-called blacks. Okay? So it's the old divide and conquer. And they made it where the so-called whites, all right, the so-called indentured servants, right, they made it where they had more rights because of the way they looked, just because they looked closer to the wealthy elite, all right, just because they looked closer to them, they had more privileges than so-called blacks on the plantation. But here's the thing, here's the mystery. A lot of those so-called indentured servants, which came out of Ireland, Scotland, and made their way over here to America, a lot of them were Jakes. A lot of them were of the lineages of so-called black people who once controlled Ireland, who once controlled Scotland. And those were Israelites. You see? You see? This is a fascinating history, man. And that's why we tell you some of these so-called white people, they're actually Jakes. They just happen to look like so-called white people. They're actually so-called black people that happen to look like so-called white people. Okay? And once you understand how lineages work, it's not a mystery to you. Most people, right, they don't understand lineages. That's an antiquated concept for most people, lineage. Back then, rulership was determined upon lineage, man. It had nothing to do with what you look like. It was what your stock was. What stock are you from? Okay? And me and Bishop Sakaran, we were discussing this yesterday on our way to camp. Back then, you weren't put in slavery or you weren't made a servant just because of the way you look. Back then, it was what stock did you come from? All right? Being put in slavery just because of the way you look, that's a relatively new concept. All right? During the time of the Roman Empire, the early first century AD, you wasn't put in slavery just because you happened to look like a so-called black person. It was what family were you from? What stock were you from? What was your nationality? What lineage did you descend from? All right? That was the deciding factor. Okay? But that slavery, just because of a person, the color of a person's skin, that came way later, man. That's a relatively new concept. And we're reading about it now, how this term white people was created. Okay? So let's keep reading. Impact on racial hierarchy. Right? This shift, notice it says shift, essentially invented the idea of a distinct white race. See? Which is not organic according to the scriptures. The Heavenly Father never created no white race. The Heavenly Father never created no black race. Okay? So we need to move away from these these concepts of white people and black people. That's just ignorance. It's ignorance. People are ignorant of it, and especially so-called Americans. Forget about them. The average so-called American is just that, dead from the neck up. Okay, they don't understand about lineages. They don't understand about hierarchy. They don't know history, you know. So, you know, they don't understand that this concept of white people, that was created. There's no such thing. Okay? And that's why we say so-called white people. And that's why we say so-called black people when we teach. Impact on racial hierarchy. This shift essentially invented the idea of a distinct white race, which was used to maintain social control by dividing the working class and ensuring that poor whites would not ally with enslaved Africans like they did during the Bacon's Rebellion. There's actually a painting of so-called white people and so-called black people coming together to fight against the wealthy elite of the plantation. Okay? So the wicked elite of Esau, they wanted to stop that, put an end to that. And that's how they did it. They created that construct called white people and gave them more rights than so-called black people. You see? So there it is, man. Pretty much in a nutshell, all right, how the term white people came about. Now that you armed with this information, you'll never look at so-called white people the same again. And when you hear people saying, yeah, he's a white guy, he's a white, you just know that they're ignorant. They don't know, they're ignorant of this information. And for some of them, this information is so startling that they can't believe it, you know. But it's the truth. But it's the truth. Okay, so on that note, I'll end it there. Hopefully you were edified. See you in the next one.